Hi, my name is Julian Tong. This week, I wrote a blog post in which I discussed the possible exit strategies for EU to come out of the lockdown. And I focused on a number of issues. I covered a number of issues, and I focused on the euro and the role of the European Union. And I particularly cautioned against continuing on the path of neoliberalism and against really unhinged nationalist sentiments. So in this recording, I'm just going to discuss part of this article. I will see how much I can cover in, say, 15 minutes. And if it's necessary, I will divide it into two different recordings. Now, to start with, let's talk about why there was a lockdown. There is a lockdown because people are convinced that it's necessary to stop to hit a pause button on their social, economic, and political lives in order to control the virus. Obviously, this is not necessary. This is a suboptimal solution. This is not necessary if given the weeks and months of warning that the EU had, if they had been more proactive in contact tracing, in testing, it would have been possible to minimize the spread before it reached such a level that that containment becomes impossible, and it is necessary to mitigate. And mitigation is basically involves cutting people off from each other, and this is lockdown. And the disruption to the economy is profound. So the reason there is a lockdown is because there was no leadership. Now, at the same time, we also see that there are countries who where there aren't lockdowns. Sweden is a notable example, and we see that they do have more cases. It is questionable whether they will have dramatically more cases and dramatically more deaths per, let's say, 1 million population. And in my opinion, this could in the end be a superior solution because, at the moment we are asphyxiated on the death count. I think in the coming years, perhaps in the next decades even, we will be looking at the number of lives being affected by this lockdown, right? If, for example, the life expectancy of, say, Italy or France is reduced by 2 years, then let's say France has roughly 60 million people. If the life expectancy is reduced by, let's not say 2 years, but 2%, then that's equivalent to causing it's comparable, right, to causing the death of 120,000. No, it's not 120,000, sorry, it's 1.2 million. It's comparable to having the death of 1.2 million people, right? So there's something to be really be mindful of. I think that's very important. But at the same time, just because there was no leadership and there was no early containment, now there is no leadership and people are taking the easy solution, which I think could lead to years, if not decades, of disruptions and reductions in a shortening of life expectancies. That's something that's really, I think, this is the context, right? And this context, I think in this context, I think already the best solution is not here, but there is still some ways out of this, and I think the European Union really has a unique tool. It has a unique tool, which is the euro. Euro is it's really a reserve currency and is an international settlement currency. It's used widely in international trade. It's not really at the level of US dollar, but it is much more broadly used than the British pound and the Japanese yen, which probably are the only ones who could be talked in the same breath, right? I think the euro is an instrument that the European Central Bank really has control over, and since the euro is a political project, I think it is important for the European Union, for the European Central Bank, to really use this weapon, use this tool that they have for the benefit of the European people. I think it would be outright stupid, to be fixated on the neoliberal trickle-down economics, which, by the way, I think the European Union has been committed to. Some people may even some people have suggested that the rapid expansion of the European Union to include the Eastern Bloc nations was in itself an attempt to drive down labor cost, to shift production to more to places where production could be managed at a lower price, so as to maximize profits for corporations. And at the same time, this has caused employment issues, has caused labor issues in a lot of the Western European countries, and it's a driving reason. It is a driving cause for the secession of Great Britain, the United Kingdom, from the European Union. So I think that's basically neoliberalism. That's the legacy so far, and in neoliberal economic theory, basically what people should drive towards is deregulation, is austerity. Of course, we can say that the European Union is not completely neoliberal in that it is highly regulated, and by the same time, it is committed to austerity. And this probably is why, I guess, a lot of people also argue that the European Union is not neoliberal. That is the United States that is purely neoliberal. Let's not discuss whether the European Union is neoliberal or not neoliberal. That, I think, is not very important discussion. But that whether the central bank, the European Central Bank, focuses on the neoliberal issues, the numbers, basically, the shareholder value, the liquidity, or if it focuses on the living standards. That's something that is, I think, really can be a big difference maker, right? If I think the European Union is going to have some rescue packages, but if these rescue packages involve, for example, providing liquidity to banks, providing loans to businesses, then that's going down the neoliberal path. Whereas if the rescue packages involves some form of universal basic income, if it includes some form of, for example, government provided rent-free housing, for example, for people who are homeless, for people who are underemployed, those will be, I think, international socialism, right? That's, I think, will be dramatically different from neoliberal policies. And I think that is where going the way of international socialism, that's how the maximum amount of impact on the standard of living of the European people can be made with the same amount of money. And at the same time, it is how you can manage to keep the European Union together. You can keep the euro, and then having this instrument, having the prestige and impact of the European economy on the world stage, that's going to be one thing. Well, on the other hand, if there is if the European Union continues on the path of neoliberalism, I do see a risk for the European Union to fall apart. And if the European Union falls apart, it's going to be carnage across the continent. And the euro, of course, will be gone. And if people are afraid of having a lot of debts now, as European Union member states, then they should be doubly afraid without the euro, because then they have only junk bonds, right? So that's something that's really worth really thinking about. And in this article, I also mentioned the European Union and the euro, basically the role of the euro vis-a-vis that of the US dollar, and why I think that the United States will not basically care if the European Union falls apart. Or maybe it is actually in the interest, it aligns with America First interest if the euro is displaced. And the reason is very simple, because the US dollar is in a unique position to control the world's resources. And combined with the US military, and of course also US soft power, this basically means that the US can continue to be the world's hegemon, right? That's at the same time, if there is a euro, even though the euro is not to the level of the US dollar, it is a risk. And there are countries who prefer to trade in euro, and the higher the number of countries that trade in euro amongst themselves, the lower the impact of the US dollar, and the lower the control and the weaker the position of the United States. So that's a consideration. So what I'm basically saying is that it will be very foolish for Europeans to think that they have the big brother there across the Atlantic, and that they will be looking, that the Americans will be looking after them. I think not. I think the Europeans should look after themselves. They should. I don't think they have any fantasies about Russia or China or any other countries. But I do think that a lot of Europeans have fantasies about the United States, and which I think it's misplaced. In this article, I basically mentioned a couple of reasons why there is this found affinity, and I explained that basically, you know what, in today's day and age, given the international, given the situation that it is that we have, given the U.S., the United States a strategic shift towards the Asia Pacific region, where there is some, strategic foes of the United States, namely Russia and China. I think America would focus more on countries such as India or Asian member states to really build their coalition there. Europe is still Europeans are still allies, but they are not so dear to the United States that they would actually care if the European Union really falls apart. And I see some really early signs, and I think a lot of people have seen it, which is why there have been a lot of people suggesting that the end of the EU is near. I don't think the end of the EU is near, but I think the EU could end. Right. So it all depends on how countries, member states of the European Union handle this crisis. They haven't done it well. I'm not sure if they have a good exit strategy at this point, but they need one. If they don't have one, what's going to happen is rising nationalism, which have already really reared their ugly heads if we really look across the continent, right? And also countries such as Germany have been. Germany really has set a very bad example. It has one of the lowest death rates in this pandemic, but it's not helping really a lot the other member states, in particular Italy. It's actually seizing some of the medical resources that destined for Italy. So what can we tell from this? What we can tell is that the European Union is not united, and perhaps just because perhaps this lack of unity is to explain why there is no good leadership, that there was no good containment in the very beginning of this pandemic, and that explains why it is necessary now for them to go in deep into mitigation, and why they have high risk of really catering to rising nationalism across the continent. And if that were to happen, if nationalism continues to rise, what will happen is that some country will follow the steps of the United Kingdom and elect to leave the European Union. And when more countries start to leave the European Union, the Union will fall, and it will fall like dominoes. And then I think in the future, maybe in the next month, maybe I will write something about that. But I guess just we can say very easily that the result, the aftermath to the European Union member states will be really similar to that of the fall of the Soviet Union. A lot of Europeans have a lot of hubris. They think that they're different, that they are, that they're better, basically. They're better than, for example, the Russians. They can think that way, but the Russians are very hardworking, very smart people, very diligent. Not less. The Russians are not inferior to Europeans in any way. So just that's I think we don't really need to go too deep into that. Another thing, the weakest link, in my opinion, that I pointed out in this blog post, is that the weakest link is France. France already has a very strong nationalist base, right? In the last general election, presidential election, their candidates actually went to the second round, which if you aren't familiar with French elections, basically they have two rounds. If there is no majority in the first round, then the first two will go to the second round, and where the winner will become the president, right? Will form a government, right? So that's that. France has a strong nationalist base, and it also has, perhaps, in my opinion, the most inward-looking public in the European Union, just because they have the worst foreign language level skills in the Union, and from my understanding, my experience, a lot of French people, when they say they go on vacation inside their country. They don't even cross the borders to, say, Italy or Spain. Of course, there are a lot of people who do. I'm just saying that the majority don't. And part of it's probably because convenience, and part of it probably because to save money. But nevertheless, just simply by having less exposure to their neighbors makes them more inward looking. This is not necessarily, I'm not saying this strictly as a negative, not to criticizing the French people. What I'm saying is that it is the most vulnerable to nationalism. And when, at the same time, of course, Macron is neoliberal, is not popular, right? If in the next election, the Front National wins, I think the days of the EU will be limited. I think that the EU will crumble, and at that point, and after, if the EU crumbles, then the Germans will happily, the Germans will know how they have fucked up during this during the response to this pandemic, because they should have acted, exhibited more leadership. They could have helped their neighbors more. They could have improved upon the unity of the Union, right? And the exit strategy and the other things I will talk in another video. I think this is going too long, but basically what I'm saying is that the tool that the European Union has is the euro, and it's very important to use this to support the people, to increase the living standards, and this really to do it without national boundaries. Right, but really look at the European Union as a whole. Of course, a lot of European citizens from richer parts of the country, namely the Netherlands, Austria, and Germany, they think that it is not their duty to really pay for support the poorer countries. Well, it is not their duty, of course not, but it is at the same time something. Let's say it is an investment for them, because if the European Union falls apart, if the European Union is no more, small countries such as the Netherlands, such as Austria, and even Germany will see their impact in world economy really diminish. They will see the rising level of trade barriers really very difficult to handle. They will see that it would have been better if they paid into the membership. Now, I think this is not necessarily the long-term solution. I think the long-term solution would be absolutely for the European Union to federalize. In the long term, the European Union can survive, and the European member states, the Europeans, can have the lifestyle and the international prestige that they currently hold, right? I think only if the European Union federalizes, only if there is a United States of Europe. That is the only way for this to go forward. Of course, I acknowledge people speak different languages, there are different cultures, and a lot of people hate each other. So this basically, all these just means that there's a lot of at stake, and the chances of the odds of success is not that good. Okay, so this is the first part of this discussion. I think maybe next week I will record the second half of the discussion, where I will talk more about the exit strategies. All right, so thanks for listening, and I wish you a great day.